Hello everyone and welcome to another Mission Makers vlog. Today we're going to talk about optimizing your mission. Now considering that Arma 3 is a 32-bit game, this provides some mission making challenges. When making missions for groups more than 26 or so people, you end up having challenges that you didn't have before with smaller groups. Most notably is that you might have people complaining about frame rate problems, and while a lot of the times this can be due to their own graphical settings, computer setup, hardware setup, and so on, it's still important to optimize the experience as best as possible so as many people can enjoy it as possible. The first thing you can do to optimize your mission is use a map that isn't oversaturated with objects. A map that has too many objects in a certain space can make it difficult for players to load all the objects at once. This can be difficult to tell and a lot of times can only be told through actual experience of running missions on these maps. But example of maps that work well are of course the vanilla maps, Stratus Altus, and a few that I personally know from Icebreaker's collection. The other thing you must do is make sure that you're only adding objects that are necessary to the mission. While adding scenery is great for atmosphere, it's important that you only add scenery on places that are guaranteed to be visited. Let's say if the players have to go into a certain room to investigate the objective, you can decorate that room as much as you want, but rooms outside of that building that may or may not be checked aren't necessary to decorate and can lower frames per second if you decorate too many things or furnish too many things that are possibly not going to be entered. This goes for any game. It's important to balance details versus performance. And even though some people want as much detail as possible, it's more important to consider the performance. If players have to do close quarters combat inside of a building that's so detailed that it lowers their FPS, they may have difficulty actually conducting CQB and can ultimately ruin their experience more than they can appreciate the scenery. Another thing you can do is called unit caching. There are multiple mods that support unit caching. I personally use MCC. You can technically make your own unit caching in the vanilla game by adding triggers that spawn units when players get close enough to them. Unit caching is a way of keeping units despawned until the players are within a certain distance. This makes sure while players are playing in one section that the other section doesn't have all the objects loaded and ruins the experience for them by lowering their frames per second. This can be especially important if the units are several kilometers away. It's also important to give the aircraft a reason not to fly over those certain areas so that they don't accidentally trigger all the units to spawn back in. Another thing you want to do during a mission is delete dead objects and bodies after players have exited an area. Because of this, you do not want them to revisit an area, so make sure that if they have to pass through the area again, that you keep significant objects such as dead vehicles and buildings, but you can delete all the things like bodies and inventory items that were dropped on the ground and so on. The reason why you don't want to reuse areas, or at least avoid it where you can, is because you have to keep a lot of the dead objects and bodies in order to maintain immersion, and all those dead bodies and objects can still lower the frames per second. So try to build your missions around a one-way path, and if they do have to revisit an area, only keep some of the objects. There are scripts you can add in the description.ext that automatically delete dead bodies and vehicles after an allotted amount of time. This is not the preferred way of doing it for custom missions for a few reasons. For one, if they're looking for a person of interest, you don't want the mission to automatically delete the body. And otherwise, people may want to take something such as bandages from those bodies. So if you do use this script, make sure you use it carefully. Also, dead vehicles being deleted in front of players can sometimes be daunting, especially if players have to sit and defend an area and then suddenly the tank that they were taking cover behind disappears. Another important thing to consider is particle effects. In a slightly different category, rain would have to be considered. You want to try avoiding using rain on larger missions, as this can significantly lower the FPS. Fire and smoke are also large factors into this. Although when I'm talking about particle effects, I'm mainly talking about fire and smoke. Arma 3 can only render a limited number of particles. You'll see if that you add too many smokestacks that suddenly all the smoke will disappear and will retract back to the fire at the base. Even particles coming out of gun barrels, from under car tires, on deserts, all count as particle effects. Remember to only use things like smokestacks and destroying vehicles where they are necessary and can be noticed. Arma 3 unfortunately doesn't support huge epic smoke clouds, so you're just gonna have to find some other way to represent that. Just remember to balance your scenery detail versus the gameplay experience, so that way you don't accidentally create a lesser experience for the players by adding too much detail. and this is a concept that can be added to any game design. The largest factor, however, as expected, is the number of units that are on the mission. If you have thousands of units, people are going to have trouble loading and playing the mission. It's important to only have as many units as you need to actually create the fight. It's best not to double down on enemy units just for the sake of making a more intense fight. At the end of the day, it's about how many units they fight at once, more so than how many units they fight during the entire mission. From instance to instance, it doesn't really matter how many enemies they fight total. If you truly want to make more intense fights, then there needs to be more enemies at once, not more enemies in the mission overall. And this also means not to add a ton of units that are not going to be interacted or fought with. Be very careful when counting the number of enemy units that you're putting on a mission file. And if you do have a ton of units, remember that you absolutely must be deleting bodies after they die and after the players pass that area. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave comments, questions, or topic suggestions if you have any. And I'll see you guys next time. So if more than one person's complaining about it, then you should ask about it after the mission and see if enough people were having a problem that it's worth investigating. Look at what you could have done differently in the mission. Maybe there was too many objects, maybe it was the wrong map, or maybe there was too many dead bodies.